Concerns surrounding this type of plane. We've got Arthur Rosenberg working on that angle of the story. So we have told our viewers this kind of plane, this MAX 8, was involved in a crash 5 months ago. Canadian Airlines, Arthur, what are you hearing from them?
So we reached out to both Air Canada and to WestJet, who do have this particular model of the 737, the MAX 8. And we know that, for example, today, just this morning, WestJet responded to our request about whether or not they are going to keep the 737 MAX 8 in flight or grounded, as we've seen some other airlines do. Take a look at what they had to say. Here's what WestJet said to CBC News. They said, "We're closely monitoring the situation and will not speculate on the cause of the incident. WestJet remains confident in the safety of our Boeing 737 fleet, including our 13 MAX 8 aircraft, first introduced in 2017. And they also go on to say that essentially with their 737 fleet, they have about 450 safe daily departures with that aircraft. And that is part of their reasoning here. But again, saying that they are closely monitoring that. But again, who is grounding them? Well, we've got a list of some of the airlines who have essentially grounded the 737 MAX 8. We know that China, Indonesia, Ethiopian Airlines, Cayman Airways, we've mentioned Mongolia as well. These are all countries that have said, and airlines that have said, that they are not going to run this particular aircraft, let it fly, until they know exactly what comes of this investigation. China, for example, has nearly 100 of those aircraft. And so that would be something that would probably disrupt their operations, but it is something that they are taking. And their statement was that they have a zero tolerance sort of policy when it comes to any sort of safety issues like this. We do know, and you've referenced the fact that Lion Air, that crash happened back in October, and there was some similarities that people are drawing, although it is too early to say that we have evidence that they are exactly identical. Of course, it's very early on in the Ethiopian Airlines investigation. But with Lion Air, there was some information that said that there was a sensory issue, that essentially a safety would go to try and make the aircraft go towards, make its nose go towards the ground, that it was reading data wrong. And it was supposed to be a safety function, but it was reading the data wrong, and that may have caused it to plunge into the Java Sea back in October. Whether or not that's the case in this Ethiopian airline crash, we have yet to find out.
And that formal final report on the Lion Air crash has yet to come out, probably this fall. So as we wait for more information on this particular crash, there have been questions, Arthur, around pilot training. In this case of the Ethiopian airline, we know the pilot had more than 8,000 hours of flying. He was an experienced pilot. But what are some pilots saying about their training?
So what's interesting about this 737 MAX 8 aircraft is that following that Lion Air crash, there was a safety bulletin that went out suggesting that there may have been an issue, and here's how you rectify it if you run up against it. Then we heard from some pilots who said that there were, in fact, updated manuals that were distributed in order to address that particular issue, and there may have been some additional training. Now, we did reach out to the Air Canada Pilots Association. Here is what they had to say to CBC News in a statement. They said that the association has proactively reached out to our Air Canada and the Boeing company and is actively engaged in monitoring the situation as it develops at this time. It would be inappropriate for us to provide additional comment. But we know also that CBC News did get a chance to reach out to an American Airlines pilot, and here's what he had to say about operating the 737 MAX 8.
We received a iPad lesson on it of about an hour long. American Airlines does not have a simulator yet, the MAX, nor do they have one on order that we're aware of. Southwest does, so we're eager to see that MAX simulator placed into our training cycle. I would note that we received immediate ground school training on the MCAS system after the Lion Air tragedy.
So he refers to the MCAS system, that's Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. That's that safety system that we were talking about that some people are pointing to in that Lion Air crash. But as you mentioned, Suhana, we will have to wait and see both of these investigations, what the final report says.
All right. Thank you for that, Arthur.
You're welcome.
With more on those safety concerns and airlines' decisions about grounding or not grounding those MAX 8 planes, we've reached Arthur Rosenberg. He's an aviation attorney and also a former pilot. Always great to have you on the program, Arthur. I want to get right to it. China says it's going to ground its fleet. It's got, 97 or something of them on, flight schedules. Smaller airlines, including Cayman, Ethiopian, Mongolia Air, they've decided to ground as well. Not the big ones in North America. Why not?
Yeah, so the world we live in is a safety-related world and an economic world. Most of the MAXs that are flying today are in the United States, Delta, American Airlines, and Southwest. To say we're going to ground all the MAX 8s in the United States would have huge economic impact both for the airlines and for Boeing. On the list of people who have grounded the airplane, including the ones you said, Indonesia, I think has also jumped on board.
Yes, it has.
I have to say, in all the years that I'm doing this, more years than I care to talk about on air, I have never quite seen anything like this. Two brand new airplanes, only months old, with almost identical fingerprints of crash sequence. The Lion Air, as you said to your previous guest, implicating the MCAS system, certainly looks like that same system, an invisible autopilot. The flight crews at the time of Lion Air, most of them didn't even know the system was in the airplane. Boeing says no to that, but it was not in the operations manual in clear and concise language. Same kind of system seems to be implicated now in this Ethiopian Airlines crash. If you're asking me, if I had myself, my family, I travel all the time, would I fly a MAX today? The answer is no.
Should Boeing step in? Should Boeing say, hey, we're going to take the lead, the initiative, and pull these planes for now?
Well, in the United States, the FAA is the one that has the authority to issue an airworthiness directive to say, look, there are safety of flight issues here. We don't completely understand the two fingerprints of the crash sequence yet in Lion Air, Ethiopian. We just recovered the black boxes. Give it a little bit of time. The airlines could independently say, look, you know what? We don't have that many MAX 8s flying. We're going to use other airplanes. They could ground their own fleet voluntarily. The ramifications economically are huge. The family line now for most of the airlines is, we have full confidence and safety in the MAX 8. But after seeing these two crash sequences almost immediately after takeoff, Lion Air was a little bit more of a roller coaster ride. Ethiopian Air, the radar data seems to show the altitude excursions were not quite as dramatic. But other than that, they're very similar. Plane dived from low altitude. Ethiopian made a huge impact crater, which tells me it came almost straight down. The decision were mine. I would say pull the plug. Let's figure out what the hell's going on and make this airplane safe for the flying public.
When you talk about the flying public as well, you know what we got to keep in mind, Arthur, this is March break. I'm pretty sure it's March break down there for you in the States as well. Families are flying off with their kids. I've sat on a plane so many times, seen that little card in the pocket of the seat in front of me, and not pulled it out to see what kind of plane I'm flying or what, informing myself about the vehicle that I was getting on. Perhaps people will do more of that now. But let me ask you this. When those planes are pulled and grounded by certain airlines, and we mentioned the countries that are doing that, what actually happens to them? What are they checking?
Okay, so when the airplanes are grounded, they've been flown to their last point of destination. If it's going to be so they're at an airport, they're at a gate. The order is issued to ground the airplane. So now the plane legally can't fly anymore. They'll back the plane away from the gate. They'll find a place on the airport, essentially a parking spot, and the plane will remain there until it's deemed to be airworthy. Again, same model and type, and then it'll be business as usual. But with this MAX 8, what's very interesting is that Boeing sold this plane largely to the airlines. Aside from its benefits, it's more economical, it's fuelish, and so on, that the flight crews from the old 737s, the older models, the Neo, could transition into the MAX without much, if any, flight training, and no simulated training. I think it's a couple, at least the American Airlines don't even have simulators for this plane. And then this MCAS system was not really made obvious to the flight crews. It remained an invisible automatic system that operated autonomously without the flight crews even knowing about it. So, Lion Air educated the world. It put flight crews on notice what to look for, but still it operates autonomously without the flight crews being aware of it. And here, a flight crew faced with an aberrant system, a runway trim condition, right after takeoff, has little or no time to diagnose this thing, recognize what the failure mode is, and then to take action. I mean, how many more crashes do they need to have before they say, you know what, maybe we didn't get it right? There will be some short-term economic impact. Look at Boeing on the U.S. market today. It's down 10, 12%. And rightfully so.
Yes, we're going to be looking at those numbers later. Just very quickly, you're saying you would not get on one of these planes right now, Arthur?
Correct.
Goodness, that leaves us a lot to think about. I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate it as always, Arthur.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.
Aviation attorney, former pilot Arthur Rosenberg. We reached him in New York.